Inside the tent, on the banks of the Volga River, 6 warriors wait in shadow. The year is 922. The girl entering knows what comes next because she has watched this ceremony before, though never from this position. Her name is Sigrid, though the Arab chronicler watching through the tent fabric will never record it. He will write only that she was young, that she had served the dead chieftain, that she had volunteered to follow him into the afterlife. The 3rd warrior has just finished. The 4th approaches. Sigrid speaks in broken Norse, words she learned during 2 years of captivity since her Slavic village burned. "I see my master," she says to no one, to everyone, to the old woman they call the Angel of Death who stands in the corner heating a blade over coals. He calls me to his hall. The 4th warrior does not care about her visions. Neither does the 5th. By the time the 6th is done, Sigrid no longer speaks of seeing anything. The Angel of Death approaches with the rope and the blade. One for strangling, one for certainty. The crowd outside begins singing louder to cover any sounds that might escape the tent. In 10 minutes, Sigrid will burn on the funeral ship beside the chieftain who owned her. She will be smoke and memory and nothing. But Sigrid was lucky. She knew when her suffering would end. She could count the minutes until release. Most captured women entered a system designed to make them pray for death that would never come. What the Vikings created was not simple slavery, but an architecture of female suffering so elaborate that Arab chroniclers, Byzantine historians, and European monks all agreed they had witnessed something unprecedented in human cruelty. This is the story they tried to forget. But before diving into the darkest parts of Norse civilizations, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. Sister Aethelred pressed herself deeper into the grain storage as Norse voices grew closer. June 8th, 793. The holy island of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumbria. An hour ago, she had been copying manuscripts in the scriptorium. Now she crouched in darkness, grain dust filling her lungs, listening to sounds she had never imagined inside monastery walls. Through cracks in the wooden storage building, she watched warriors sorting the captured. Her friend Bridget was dragged by her hair toward the beach where strange ships waited. Bridget had been beautiful, with auburn hair that caught sunlight during morning prayers. That beauty had become her curse. The Vikings separated women into groups with the efficiency of farmers sorting livestock. Young and beautiful in one group, older but strong in another. The elderly and the sick received quick deaths. Their bodies left where they fell. A hand plunged into the grain beside her. Fingers found her arm. The warrior who pulled her out had blue eyes and smelled of salt and blood. He said something in his language, then shoved her toward the growing line of captives. Sister Aethelred, who had devoted her life to Christ at age 14, who had spent 12 years in peaceful contemplation, was about to discover what Vikings did to the women they captured. The ship journey redefined suffering. 40 women crowded into a space meant for 20. No food for the first 2 days. Water only when waves crashed over the side, leaving them to lick salt moisture from wood that countless previous captives had also licked. The women were organized by their potential value, and even in the darkness below deck, the warriors knew exactly which ones had been selected for which purposes. Ethelred learned to recognize the different types of visits. Sometimes warriors came for violence, sometimes for other things, sometimes just to look, to evaluate their shares of the coming division. The journey from Lindisfarne to Norway took 11 days. By the 5th day, 2 women had died. Their bodies were thrown overboard without ceremony. By the 8th day, Ethelred had stopped praying. God seemed very far from this wooden tomb sliding across dark water. When they reached Norway, the division began immediately. The raid leader claimed first choice, selecting 6 women, including Bridget. His warriors chose next by order of reputation and valor shown in battle. Ethelred went to a farmer named Gunnar, who needed field workers. She watched Brigid led away toward the chieftain's hall and thought her friend's fate must be better. She was wrong. 20 years later, Ethelred would die in Norway, her hands destroyed by decades of grinding grain, her back permanently bent from carrying impossible loads. She never learned what happened to Brigid initially, though she heard rumors through the elaborate networks that enslaved women developed. Brigid had lasted 3 months in the chieftain's hall before being sold to a trader heading east. From there, she vanished into the vast Viking slave networks that stretched from Iceland to Constantinople. The night Lindisfarne fell was not unique. It was the template for 3 centuries of raids that would transform northern Europe. Every monastery, every village, every isolated farm faced the same possibility. The ships could appear any dawn, and when they did, the women knew their lives as human beings were over. But Brigid was beautiful, and beauty in Viking captivity was a curse beyond imagination. The morning after a successful raid on a Frankish village, Chieftain Ragnar Ironhand walked slowly between rows of captured women. His men had arranged them by approximate age and apparent health. 200 women knelt in the mud of the temporary camp, their homes still smoking in the distance. Ragnar carried a staff that he used to lift chins, turn faces toward the light, inspect his new property. He separated them into 3 categories with practiced efficiency. The first group, laborers, included older women and those showing signs of hard living. These would work fields, grind grain, and maintain households until their bodies failed. The second group, breeders, consisted of healthy young women of childbearing age. They would produce more slaves, their children automatically inheriting their mother's status. The third group, marked for special purposes, included the beautiful, the noble, and the very young. Marie was 30, a mother of 4 who had watched Vikings cut down her husband in their doorway. She went to the laborer group. Her hands showed she knew how to work, and her sturdy build suggested years of productive labor remained. She would spend 16 hours a day grinding grain in Ragnar's household, her fingers gradually deforming from the repetitive motion until they looked like twisted roots. 8 years she would last before her body simply stopped functioning, worn out like a tool used past breaking. Isabel was 16, daughter of a minor nobleman who had tried to organize resistance. She went to the breeder group. Within a month, she would understand what that categorization meant. Within a year, she would give birth to her first child, a boy who would never know his father's name. Over the next decade, she would produce 7 children, all born into slavery, all separated from her as soon as they could work. The Viking economy ran on this multiplication of human property. Marguerite possessed the kind of beauty that transcended circumstances. 20 years old, with features that remained striking even through tears and mud, she went to the Special Purposes group. Her fate diverged from the others immediately. While Marie and Isabel would remain in Scandinavia, Marguerite would be cleaned, fed better food, taught basic phrases in multiple languages. She was an investment being prepared for sale to the highest bidder in the great slave markets of the East. The selection process revealed the economic precision underlying Viking raids. This was not random violence, but calculated harvesting. Each category of woman had specific market values and designated purposes within the elaborate machinery of Norse slavery. The Vikings had industrialized human suffering with an efficiency that would not be matched until the Atlantic slave trade 7 centuries later. Ragnar's selections that morning were replicated across hundreds of raids each year. Vikings developed expertise in evaluating human property instantly. They could determine a woman's approximate age by her teeth, her capacity for work by her hands, her breeding potential by her hips. They knew which ethnicities commanded premium prices in which markets. Frankish women brought good prices in Ireland. Irish women were valued in Iceland. Slavic women commanded the highest prices in Byzantine markets. The economic calculations went deeper. A woman who could weave was worth 3 times one who couldn't. A woman who could read and write, especially in Latin, might be sold to Byzantine households seeking educated servants. A woman with knowledge of herbs and healing could serve Viking households in multiple capacities. Every skill increased value. Every capability meant extended survival, though survival itself became questionable blessing. Marie discovered her fate that first day when she was brought to the grinding stones. Two massive circular stones, one atop the other, with a wooden handle that required constant rotation. Grain poured in from above, flour emerged from below, and the woman turning the handle existed only to maintain this transformation. The woman she replaced had died the previous day, her heart giving out after 7 years of the same motion. Marie took her position and began to push. The stones were heavy. The work was endless. Her hands started bleeding within hours. Isabel learned her designation's meaning when she was brought to a separate building where other young women lived. They explained the reality in whispers. She would be bred like livestock. The children would not be hers to raise. Resistance meant punishment that stopped just short of damaging her reproductive capacity. Acceptance meant survival, though survival in this context required redefining the word entirely. Marguerite's preparation began immediately. She was bathed, her hair arranged in styles that emphasized her features. She was taught to stand in ways that displayed her figure advantageously. She learned basic phrases in Arabic, Greek, and Slavonic. Every day, traders would visit to inspect her, though actual sale awaited arrival at a major market. She was merchandise being prepared for display, and the better she presented, the higher her price would climb. But survival was not measured in years. It was measured in how many times you could be broken before staying broken. The auction block in Dublin stood 15 feet high, ensuring visibility for the hundreds of buyers crowding the market square. The year was 852, and Dublin had transformed from an Irish settlement into the Vikings' western headquarters for human trafficking. Princess Orleth stood naked on the platform, her royal lineage now merely a selling point to increase her price. The auctioneer spoke in 4 languages, describing her qualities to Byzantine merchants, Moorish traders from Spain, Norse settlers from Iceland, and local Irish collaborators who profited from the suffering of their own people. He emphasized her nobility, her education, her virginity, though the last was assumption rather than verified fact. Verification would lower the price by suggesting damage to the merchandise. Bidding started at 12 marks of silver. A Byzantine merchant raised it to 15, knowing that an Irish princess would command attention in Constantinople's slave markets. An Icelandic settler countered with 18, needing women for his expanding household. The final price reached 24 marks, paid by a trader who specialized in moving high-value women along the eastern routes. Orleth would travel through Sweden, down Russian rivers, and eventually reach Baghdad, where her white skin and red hair would make her an exotic curiosity in some wealthy merchant's household. But Orleth's sale was just one transaction in a market that processed thousands of women monthly. Dublin's slave infrastructure rivaled Rome's ancient markets in scale and exceeded them in efficiency. Holding pens could maintain 500 women at a time. Feeding stations provided minimal sustenance to preserve value without excessive cost. Medical inspectors ensured that sick women were isolated to prevent epidemics that might destroy inventory. The Welsh girl called Branwen had been sold 16 times in 2 years. Each sale moved her farther from home, through different Viking settlements where she served briefly before being resold. The constant movement was deliberate. Women who stayed in one place too long might develop connections, might organize resistance, might become human to their owners. The trade kept them in motion, perpetually displaced, forever foreign. In the holding pens, a Pictish woman gave birth on straw that hadn't been changed in weeks. The baby would be raised to slavery if it survived, though infant mortality in the pens exceeded 60%. The mother would be given 3 days to recover before returning to the auction block, her recent pregnancy advertised as proof of fertility. Buyers appreciated confirmation that their investments could multiply themselves. A Frankish noblewoman named Elisande attempted to buy her own freedom, offering information about hidden gold in her family's estates. The traders listened to her information, sent men to retrieve the gold, then sold her anyway. The concept of honor in dealings with slaves was considered absurd. They were property, and property could not make deals. The price variations revealed the precise commodification of female humanity. A virgin between 14 and 18 might bring 20 marks. The same woman, no longer virgin, dropped to 12 marks. A woman over 25 brought 8 marks if she showed no specialized skills. A woman over 35 brought 4 marks unless she possessed exceptional abilities. A pregnant woman might bring 15 marks with the understanding that she carried potential additional property. Skills created premium categories. A woman who could illuminate manuscripts might bring 30 marks from monasteries seeking to continue their work despite lacking trained monks. A woman with medical knowledge might bring 40 marks from settlements needing healers. Musical ability, particularly singing, could double a woman's value for wealthy households seeking entertainment. 3 ships arrived weekly during trading season, each carrying 30 to 60 women gathered from raids across the Christian world. The logistics required extraordinary coordination. Food and water for the journey, security to prevent escapes, medical knowledge to minimize losses, and extensive networks to identify buyers. The Vikings had created the medieval world's most sophisticated human trafficking system. One shipment of 30 women from Francia to Iceland demonstrates the trade's brutal mathematics. 2 women jumped overboard on the 3rd day, preferring drowning to whatever awaited them. 5 died during the journey from disease, violence, or despair. The remaining 23 were distributed among Icelandic settlers who had placed orders in advance. Each woman represented a specific request: young for breeding, old for field work, beautiful for status display, skilled for specialized labor. The woman who jumped overboard left behind a daughter in the ship's hold. The child, perhaps 7 years old, watched her mother choose death over slavery. She would remember that choice for the rest of her life in Iceland, where she would grow up as property, have children as property, and die as property on an island where the ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. Freedom always visible, but forever unreachable. Trading seasons followed predictable patterns. Spring brought fresh captives from early raids. Summer saw peak volume as Viking fleets returned from extended campaigns. Autumn brought final sales, before winter made sea travel impossible. Winter meant reduced prices for merchants willing to maintain inventory through the frozen months. Each season had its own cruel rhythms. Those sold to Iceland faced a unique horror. They were entering an island prison where escape meant freezing death in endless ocean. At the Thing, Iceland's General Assembly at Thingvellir, in the year 970, the law speaker stood on the rock platform and recited from memory the section of Graga's law concerning female thralls. His voice carried across the gathered crowd as he spoke words that had been refined over generations to completely erase female humanity within legal frameworks. A thrall woman's body belongs entirely to her master. She cannot refuse any use of her person. Her children belong to her master. She cannot own property. She cannot bear witness. She cannot seek compensation for any harm. She exists outside law, except as her master's possession. These were not abstractions, but daily realities for thousands of women across the Norse world. The law created a state of living death, where women existed physically, but had no legal existence as persons. They were animate property, breathing objects, conscious possessions with no more rights than furniture or livestock. The case being tried that day illustrated the system perfectly. Thorstein Redbeard had killed his neighbor's female thrall named Asa during a dispute over field boundaries. The dead woman had been caught in the middle when Thorstein struck at his neighbor with an axe. The legal question was not murder, but property damage. The judgment required Thorstein to pay her replacement value, 8 marks of silver for a woman of approximately 20 years who could weave. No additional punishment, no consideration of the life ended. simply a commercial transaction to compensate for destroyed property. Asa had been captured in Ireland 5 years earlier. She had learned Norse, adapted to Iceland's harsh climate, and developed exceptional skill in weaving that made her valuable to her owner. She had even borne 2 children who now served in the same household. None of this mattered legally. Her death was recorded in the same manner as the loss of sheep in a storm, regrettable destruction of assets requiring financial compensation. The Gragas laws went further in their dehumanization. A fascinating provision called the morning gift tradition allowed masters to lend female thralls to guests as hospitality gestures. Refusing such use was not legally possible. The woman became a temporary gift, passed between men like cups of mead. Any children resulting from such arrangements automatically became the property of the woman's owner, regardless of the father's status. Ragnhild experienced this system when her master hosted a gathering of 5 chieftains to discuss a raiding alliance. For a week, she was passed among the guests nightly. By the meeting's end, she was pregnant. 9 months later, she gave birth to a son whose father could have been any of 6 men. The child was nobody's son, everybody's property, raised as a slave with no identity beyond his mother's servitude. The laws addressed every contingency of female slavery with disturbing thoroughness. If a thrall woman was injured by someone other than her owner, compensation went to the owner, not the injured woman. If she was permanently disabled, her value decreased, and the owner could seek the difference from whoever caused the damage. The woman's suffering was irrelevant. Only the economic impact on her owner mattered. Gudrun discovered this when a visiting trader assaulted her so violently she could no longer work. Her owner demanded compensation not for Gudrun's pain, but for the loss of her labor capacity. The trader paid 3 marks, the difference between a functional thrall and a damaged one. Gudrun received nothing except continued servitude in a body that would never fully heal. The inheritance laws created generational bondage that seemed impossible to escape. Children of thrall women were automatically thralls, regardless of their